All right, we are live. Welcome to the Charlie Paparelli Show. I'm Charlie Paparelli, a 30-year angel investor. Today's topic is passion, perseverance, and rewards, an entrepreneur story. To be sure not to miss an episode, please subscribe at paparelli.com. Simply submit your email address. If you do that, you'll receive my weekly interview as an alert, and also as a bonus, my Tuesday blog that I put out for entrepreneurs. This show is focused on helping entrepreneurs build valuable businesses. To this end, I interview entrepreneurs who stand apart from other entrepreneurs in many ways, simply because of their values. And my guest is one of those entrepreneurs. Today's guest is Brian Fosse. Brian is the former founder and CEO of Lalabu, a company that designed and commercialized baby-wearing shirts. Brian started Lalabu in 2011 and exited in 2022. Lalabu was an 11-year overnight success story. This is how entrepreneuring and building companies really works. You know, this is what I've seen over my 30 years as an angel investor. It takes many years to establish a brand, to build loyal customers and grow value. Brian did it. Brian has an undergraduate and a graduate degree from Georgia Tech. I met Brian over 8 years ago at an entrepreneur angel get-together where I heard him pitch Lalabu for the first time. And his passion was captivating, but clothing business is not really my thing, so I kind of passed on the investment. Brian moved from Atlanta, moved up to Bend, Oregon with his wife, Kerrie, and their 4 children, with one on the way, I just found out as we're preparing for this interview. Welcome, Brian, and thank you for joining me and sharing your entrepreneurial journey with my audience.
Thanks for that introduction. I'm really glad to be here, just hoping that this is helpful to other entrepreneurs out there.
Well, I hope it's helpful to you, too. I hope Kerrie looks at this and says, "That's not quite true, Brian." You know.
Yeah, maybe she should be here. I mean, that would be a great first thing to say. Lalabu would not have been a success. It never would have even happened without my wife. And we'll see what we get into. But I'm thankful every day that she hung with me through it all because we had some tough times.
I think we're going to hear a lot about this. And that's what people are interested in. You know, one of the things that I ascribe to is this thing that I heard that it says that when we share our failures, we build bridges, and when we share our successes, we burn bridges. Okay. You know, I think getting into what it really takes to make one of these companies go, you know, the nuts and bolts of the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will, that's what people are interested in. That's what we learn from, right?
Sure.
But what are you up to? And, you know, I think when we last talked, you told me that you did exit from Lalabu.
Yes. Yeah, so I sold it. We actually sold the majority of it. We still have a minority stake. It's a small stake. So we're hopeful for the future growth of the business. I continued working through the end of June this year and fully handed it off to the new team at the beginning of July. So since July, I'm not working on Lalabu day to day. You know, here and there, I might get contacted for help on a few things, but mostly the new owners and the new team are doing it at this point.
So who are the new owners?
Yeah, the new owners is Andy Carr. He has another baby business that made sleep loungers, Snuggle Me Organic, and they invested in our business. His wife, Mia Carr, had been a minority investor starting in 2020, and there's a whole story about how she became a business partner, and really her coming along as a partner was part of what allowed us to get through 2020. And then ultimately it was her and her husband that ended up buying out our business after seeing how it went with me for 2 years.
Well, that's a good thing to hear, because most of the things that I hear dealing with tech companies, it's mostly after this many years in business, it's usually private equity firms that now are coming in and taking people out. But you're dealing with somebody who actually knows your marketplace.
Yeah, she did
really
it.
Cool.
Yeah, they grew their business and they sold it to, I'm not sure if it was private equity, but it was more a group like that.
Yeah.
And they decided, you know what, we really like doing this. We want to do it again. Let's take Lalabu from where it is to the next step. So we had grown to about $5 million in revenue when I sold to them, they had grown their business much larger. They have a goal to grow Lalabu to, 20, 25 million a year in revenue in the next few years.
That's a whole nother level of commitment and a new level of expertise that is required to kind of get it there for sure.
Right.
Not counting the capital that's going to be necessary in order to make that
capital. And that was never my vision. I looking at myself, I always feel like I'm an idea guy that likes to take things that don't exist at all and actually bring them into reality, into the world, like to offer something new to the world, and then get it to a certain point. And I always had the goal that I'd like to hand it off at some point to somebody who wants to take it and run with it. And
when did you know this purpose?
I think I've just always come up with ideas, and I like seeing things that people say, hey, that may not work, or that can't be, and saying, well, no, I think it can be. And I kind of have a trend of perseverance throughout my life that started from since I was really young, and optimism. And I think I needed both of those throughout the last few years, this optimism that things would work out even when they didn't look like they were going to work out. And this just desire to persevere and not quit. And it's a blessing and a curse, because sometimes I think I push myself too hard.
I think it's unique what you do. I mean, what you said, when you said, I always have lots of ideas. Mm-hmm. People, entrepreneurs like that, there are entrepreneurs, they have lots of ideas, and they do have, for a time, perseverance. Yeah. But because they have lots of ideas, they lose interest and never go deep. So as soon as they sort of I got this thing figured out, then all of a sudden they're chasing the next shiny object, if you will, the new idea. But you're unique in that, you had the idea, and I'm sure while you were deep in Lalabu, you probably had a lot of other ideas. How did you stick with Lalabu so long, as opposed to just saying, it's a downtime right now, this is a good time to just move on to the new idea?
Yeah, I'd say it was this belief within myself that this is what the Lord had for me to be doing right then, and then a commitment to not get distracted with other things. I remember the day that I left, there's a story behind this, but there's the day that I left my previous job, which was working for supply.com. It was a good job to do Lalabu full time. And I told some of the guys that I was in the MBA program with at Georgia Tech afterwards, and some of them just had this look of kind of shock on their face.
How old were you, just as a sideline?
That would have been 2013. So what was that, 9 years ago? So I guess it would have been 31.
31, okay.
Yeah. And because it's I was leaving this good job I had at supply.com was growing quite a bit. They're doing great. Going to do this startup, right? And I remember my dad being very uncomfortable with it, because my father thought, Brian, if this doesn't work out, what are you going to do then? People aren't going to want to hire you because you left this job to go to a startup. And the interesting thing, which I'm sure you know as well, is I actually had more opportunities come my way than I ever had in those first couple of years. I mean, the recruiters and people calling me, Home Depot reached out to me about if I wanted to help, work on their e-commerce that they were building up, because I think people would see the initiative of, here's somebody that has experience and they're taking initiative to do something, and they're trying to kind of recruit me into their venture. But what I just told everybody was, I'm doing Lalabu right now, and I'm not doing anything else. And sometimes I look back on that because there was opportunities I passed up that I probably could have made some good money on. But it's the same way I approached school when I was at Georgia Tech. People go to college for a lot of different reasons. When I was in college, I just said to myself, my primary reason for being here is to get an education. So I would just discipline myself to do school first and do everything else second. And that's kind of the same thing I took.
Where did you get that from? Did you get that from your dad, your mom? I mean, who modeled that for you?
I give credit to a couple of things. One is my father. When I was growing up, he would say to me, hey, Brian, if you work hard in school, do well throughout school and college, it'll set you up and give you opportunities for the rest of your life. And so my parents always put a big focus on doing well academically. So that kind of got that into my head. But the other thing was I grew up, something happened. I started swimming when I was 4. It was earlier than most people did just because my sister swam. And then something clicked when I was 7 and I just became really good at swimming. And there was a period there where I wanted to be an Olympic swimmer and I swam year round. And then there was a period in high school where I ran cross country and, we ended up going to state and winning our school's first state championship. And these are things, swimming, cross country, and then going to Georgia Tech as an engineering undergrad, that are hard, like physical perseverance. A lot of times when you're running a cross country race or swimming a race, your body's telling you want to quit, and you have to mentally train yourself to just keep going. And I feel like I had to do that somewhat as an undergrad at Georgia Tech too, and it would be hard. You want to quit, and I just had to say, no, you just got to keep going. And so I, in some ways, feel like the Lord gave me these things that happened throughout my life that made me have perseverance and be in situations where you'd want to quit, but keep going. And that prepared me some, because Lalabu, especially during some of the hard years, there was people telling me to quit, saying quit, throwing their I had bankruptcy attorneys telling me declare bankruptcy.
I was almost one of those that, I was this close to telling you, and we're going to get into what happened there, but telling you, Brian, I mean, look, you got a wife, you got 4 kids. Come on, man. You need to take care of them first. But I do like what you're saying. At 4 years old, you start swimming and you're attracted to it and stick with it. I mean, gosh, to swim, all the people that I know that were swimmers, almost to a person, are successful. Because when you're doing that, you're sitting in a pool, going back and forth in a pool for miles, right?
Yep.
For hours, first thing in the morning, all by yourself, just the getting up and getting in the pool and then doing it. It's just an absolute incredible discipline that takes. But that training that you went through, it's funny also what you said. I love what you said about, and then when I was at Tech, I knew I just needed to keep going. Did that come from the swimming?
Hey, and not to make it sound like I just have it all together. My first week as an undergrad at Georgia Tech, I called my parents and I was trying to convince them why I should switch to a management major, because I wouldn't have to take all these engineering classes. And my mom and dad said to me, Brian, we want you to do 1 semester, and if you want to change after that, you can. And obviously, I kept going from there. They really try to intimidate you your first semester at Georgia Tech as an undergrad. So,
well, I think what I learned is about Georgia Tech, hanging out down at the Advanced Technology Development Center at Georgia Tech and all that. I always see the students that are working there. Yeah. And they're all brilliant. I don't know, that the people that work there, they either have a 3.9 or a 4.0 average, which is incredible to me. But it is all about how to learn on your own.
Yes.
You have to know that people, they're going to kind of put the material in front of you, but you're going to have to learn it on your own. There's not somebody that's going to be banging into your head. But I just wanted to say one thing quickly about this, just keep going.
Yep.
And I think it's so true in entrepreneurship. And I did write an article about this. I have a friend who's a Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL. He's now probably 71 years old. And I went to his house. He lives in Venice Beach, and he had a picture of himself there. And I said, man, I can't believe you're a Navy SEAL and you did it for so many years and all this. I said, so few people get through that program. He goes, yeah, and I don't understand why they couldn't get through it. I said, what do you mean? I said, I've seen the movies. He goes, all you have to do is to decide to just keep going. Just decide not to quit. You just do the next thing. You just do it. And that's how I became a Navy SEAL. And at 63 years old, this guy also walked the entire Appalachian Trail. Yeah. So he's that guy, okay? But you did it. You have that spirit in you too, and you got that at a very young age, which certainly helped you as an entrepreneur.
It's interesting you saying that made me think of 2 things. One, as a side note, I did a 7-day hike in Patagonia once where my knee went out on me, and I had to use like sticks to use my shoulders the whole way out. And that was hey, you got to just keep going. But it's interesting you say that, because I too feel like one of the things that determines whether a business succeeds or fails is how long the founders can keep going at it. You mentioned me pitching where you saw me pitch Lalabu very early on. There are other people that I got to know in those scenarios that pitched and got investment. I remember there's people in the first couple of years that had businesses and they would have all this money, and I felt like their businesses had more potential than mine. And I thought for sure they're going to be successful. And one after another, pretty much every single one of them failed during the 10 years that I did mine for one reason or another. And most often it was because the founder decided, I'm going to stop. Sometimes they decided they were going to stop because they would say, look, I'm making no money doing this, and I used to make this much money. I'm going to go back to, I'm not willing to make the sacrifices. I'm going to go back to where I'm already getting value. And sometimes it's because people just couldn't get what they needed to keep going. I'm thankful that I somehow found the way to keep the capital I needed to keep going. Obviously, as you know, there's some people that they just can't get the capital and they have to stop because they run out of money. But it kind of does seem that one of the keys is if you can keep working at it long enough, you can find success, you know?
But it's also not, it's interesting that instead of thinking further down the road, right? This is the Navy SEAL thing. You know, if I've got another 48 hours of this hell week, I don't think I could make it, right? But if you think, oh, they want me to do sit-ups in the breakers of the waves, that's what I need to do now. Yeah. You see, and when you're in trouble, like you talk about, and there's no money around and there's no hope and you just say, I'm going to get up and I'm going to do what I can do today. That's what you did. Yeah. What happened with those other people when you look at some of those examples where these people did get money and they did seem to have a good business, yet they just decided to stop?
Yeah.
You know, what do you think? Did you know those people? Did you follow them closely and figure out?
I knew some of them closely. Some of them were ones that I just got to know along the way at these different events where you'd pitch for investment. Most common to me seemed to be when somebody had a high paying job or some other way to have just income come in right away. It was more challenging for them to say, let me go without for a couple of years when I could be making this, you know, let me take this risk of something that may not ever come together when I have this, you know, sure thing, you know, because when you work for somebody else, you get a paycheck. So you get that pay for the work you do along the way. That was the biggest thing that I saw.
My son talked about this too. He said, he's an entrepreneur. He's living in London now. And he said in this first year while doing this, he says, you know what I'm doing, Dad, is crazy. And I said, why? He said, because I can get a really good paying job with Google and Microsoft and, you know, name whoever it is. You know, they're going to pay me, you know, a couple of $100,000 or $150,000 to $200,000. And here I am making nothing, putting my money into this thing. My wife and I, just like you and Kerrie, are totally dedicated to this. You know, I'm crazy. This is crazy. Now he's in year 3 and he's still busting it. But because he knows that this is his life purpose kind of a deal. He can't he can't say no. I always talk to these entrepreneurs and say, look, man, you got to have this burn the ships mentality.
Yeah.
You know, so, we hit the shore, the ships are gone, there ain't no going back, but alternatives will kill you.
You got to have that mentality. I think one thing that really helps is to have in your mind the reason where you really know the reason why you're doing it. Like you said, your son, that he feels this is his life's purpose. I had a conviction that that's what I was supposed to be doing right then was Lalabu. And the reason that I even went out to do it full time, the catalyst was the birth of my first son. I remember I left my job about when he was 5 or 6 months old. It was in January of 2013. And I had this desire that as my children got older, I wanted to be more involved in their life. I wanted to be able to be a part of homeschooling them. I wanted to be a part of helping them build businesses. It's like the older I got, the more I wanted to be able to be involved with my family versus a lot of people, the older they get, at least while they're getting into their 40s and 50s, is when their career is wanting the most from them.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I just had this conviction that this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm trying to prepare for this future outcome that I want to have. And if I were to have quit in the throes of, we'll probably get into when I was facing bankruptcy and such, if I'd quit during that time, if I declared bankruptcy, it would have totally set me back because I would have been at a part of starting over, not being able to start my own business, only having the option to go get a job with someone else. And so I wasn't willing to do that unless I was forced into it. So I wasn't going to just take that route.
Yeah, but what you did too is, you know what your father told you, the advice that he gave you, why are you doing this? You know, no one's going to hire you.
Yeah.
You know, I say the I agreed with you. I agree with the advice your father gave. So in those first 2 years, the corporations still didn't view you as an entrepreneur. You were just starting something new like a lot of people do. But, why don't you come work for us? We'll give you a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And but I'll tell you, you're not getting calls today.
That's true. I'm not.
At some point, they go, he ain't one of us. Okay. Mm-hmm. And if you try to get a job with them, you're competing against guys that are corporate people and they trust them more than they're going to trust you, even though you might be more gifted and talented. Sure. So I agree with you, your fathers. That's part of the burn the ships. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. You got to say, like, I'm giving up the corporate life and I'm giving up a paycheck for the rest of my life. And you go like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Who thinks about that?
That's a good point. And, as just a kind of side comment, if anybody's out there thinking, hey, should I get an MBA? Should I be an entrepreneur? My perspective on it now, because I got asked this for a while after getting my MBA, if you want to go the corporate route and climb the ladder, I think the MBA is incredibly helpful. If you're wanting to launch your own business and you're deciding you're going to be an entrepreneur for life, take that money and time you would have put into MBA and start your business. That's
those are great criteria on whether I should go for an MBA or not. I love that.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. So let's talk a little bit about getting Lalabu out of the ground.
Yep.
What I like that you said, I just want to revisit this for a second, is you looked at being an entrepreneur. First, you looked at your lifestyle, if you will, the kind of life that you and Kerrie wanted to live. What were your priorities? And this idea. It wasn't that the idea was going to take 100% of you with nothing left over. You weren't going to allow that to happen.
Yep.
And I've seen that with somebody else that's a nephew of mine. He actually said, this is the way I want to work. And I'm like, that will never work. You're going to have to put all you have into this thing. And you know what? He made it work.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. I mean, even throughout the whole series of the launch, it was very intense the first couple of years. There was a period in the middle there where it seemed like we had gotten to a better spot, and then it became intense again and very challenging. But even through all of that, I always protected at a minimum the weekends. I never worked on Saturdays and Sundays. In fact, I usually, oh no, never. I just said, I'm not going to do it. Saturdays and Sundays is for my family. So even if during those weeks I was working, 60 plus hours, Monday through Friday, I did not work on the weekends. It's just something I never did. And, I think when I first got married, I ended up getting into the Georgia Tech MBA program. I was pretty young, decided to do it. And I told my wife, she was working at Delta Airlines as an engineer at the time. I said, she's got to go to work from 8 to 5 every day. I'm going to do the MBA program from 8 to 5 every day, and I'm not going to spend any time on it outside of that. So I did my whole MBA program too during work hours and just wouldn't let myself study or work in the evenings because I wanted to spend the time with her. So that's just...
So what you did, though, in order to do what you did, to have those priorities, is you had the discipline that during those 8 hours, you actually used the 8 hours. You didn't waste time. No. You knew you had to get stuff done. In that 60 hours of during the week, you did what needed to be done when it needed to be done.
Yeah, it makes you not procrastinate if you put boundaries. I found that putting boundaries around things actually, I think, makes you more productive because during the time you have, you use it more effectively. I mean, it's the same thing if you're limited on cash. If you're limited on cash, you use that cash more effectively. If you have extra cash, you waste it. Same with time, I think.
How did you, when you talk about boundaries, tell me about boundaries. Tell me how that works.
I think.
How did you say, I don't procrastinate? You're the only person in all of this world who doesn't procrastinate. How do you? No, I do. I have a CPA who doesn't procrastinate too. He's amazing, that guy. I always say he's the most productive person I know. How did you get to that you don't procrastinate, that you don't?
Well, I definitely did as a child growing up and at different points in my life. And I think I just learned along the way how to structure my time where it would work best for me. And so I think where I really got there was as an undergrad at Georgia Tech. I figured out that I didn't like studying and doing work at night, and I wasn't as effective at it at that point. So I just disciplined myself. I would make a plan for each semester on, Here's when I'm going to work on each class and even what building I'm going to work on it in campus. And I just had a routine where I'd go from class to this random building where I'd do my homework from that class to the next. And from, the first class in the morning until, 4:30 or 5 o'clock, I worked the whole time. And at 5 o'clock, I was done. And so from 5 o'clock on, I could go to the gym. I could do intramural sports. I could do whatever. But basically, I was never hanging out and wasting time from 8 to 5 and as undergrad. And then I wasn't doing it when I was in grad school. My wife was working, and I kind of carried that on to Lalabu, where I work during this time and I don't work at all, Friday evening until Monday morning. Okay.
So how would you, if you're talking to an entrepreneur who, or somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur, but they are a procrastinator, they have that in them. I have that in me. All right. What advice, how did you go from, I used to procrastinate, or I used to waste time. How did you go from that to, I don't do that anymore? How do you cross that bridge? Because I cross it multiple times a week. Okay. And then I come back and I'm procrastinating again. So how did you stay in that zone?
I think I'll just give my experience, my thoughts on it off the top of my head is I think there's life experiences that led me to make changes in my life. For example, I used to play a lot of video games, middle school, high school. It was meeting my wife when we started to date, and it was when I was working down for Disney World as an engineer. I didn't take my video game system with me, and I spent all my spare time that I would have been playing video games dating my wife and courting her. And I realized that time with her was so much more valuable than the output I was getting from playing video games. And I had kind of broken that habit, which I think a lot of times habits can kind of be like addictions. And so I had broken it, and I decided I'm not going to go back into that habit or addiction. And I just never played video games again. I think having a catalyst of something that changes in your life that allows you to get out of a bad habit, and you need to replace it with a new habit. And then you have to just make the decision, I'm not going to go back to that bad habit. And it's not like there's a for sure way you have to do it. I think it's like any other addiction or habit. At a certain point, you're going to be tempted to do it, and you have to just say, I'm not going to do that anymore. But I think having a period of time away from it where you're replacing it with something else that's better allows you to be more effective at making that change.
That's a great explanation. That's really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So how does somebody, Georgia Tech engineer, decide to get into what is it called? I had to write this down. It's the baby wearing shirts, right?
That's what. And by the way, for anybody that's interested, my wife printed some.
It's the product. Okay.
So here's a picture. That's our dad's shirt. That's our shirt for fathers. We have a few pictures on the wall to remember some of the stuff we've gone through.
By the way, I love that you have new models now, because the only model you ever used to have was you and Kerrie. Okay.
Yes. we were models. Yeah. You do a lot of things because you have nobody else to do it when you're a founder with low cash. I had, like we mentioned earlier, I had lots of ideas, and I think it's funny because I worked at Disney World as an engineer, and then I graduate from the MBA program, and I work at selling toilets and plumbing online. Like I tell people a lot of times, I was a toilet salesman. We sold millions of dollars of toilets, e-commerce, which doesn't sound that novel anymore. But if you go back to like 2007, 2008, selling toilets online was kind of novel,
Yeah, it was novel. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazon wasn't selling them or doing anything like that. So, and then I go into making a baby carrier. And I remember when I went to do it, people would say to me like, well, what experience do you have to design a product? And I think this just goes with the mindset that I always had, which came from Georgia Tech. I don't know how to do something. I can figure out how to do it. I think that's the main thing I learned there.
Hey, what was your first son's birth that started this whole thing?
So I actually got into building a baby carrier before Kerrie was even pregnant with our son. So
why?
So here's why. I got one more picture.
I don't know any single guys that are. Okay, go ahead.
So this is Lalabu. She's a woman that lives.
Tilt it down a bit. Tilt it down a bit.
Yeah, there you go.
Got a little reflection on it.
Yeah, that's from my windows.
There it is. Okay, good.
So Lalabu was named after a mom who lives in a village called Jabasso outside of Burkina Faso. That's her. That's her from 2009. And my wife, her aunt, had been a missionary in Burkina Faso for 40 years. And it had always been a dream of Kerrie to go visit her there. And when Kerrie worked for Delta, we could get some standby flights. So we had made a trip. We took like a week off. And over Thanksgiving 2009, we went to visit her aunt, and her aunt took us out to the village that she had been a missionary in. Jabasso. It's a small village, 9 hours outside of Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is just south of Ghana. So it's just
good. You had to give me a country there. Okay, yeah. So it's Ghana?
Yeah, so Burkina Faso is a country too. A lot of people just haven't heard of it because it's a very poor country. And so we had gone to visit there for Thanksgiving, and when we got there, Lalabu had just had twins, and she taught Kerrie how to tie a baby on her back with a piece of cloth. And I could go into that a lot more, but when we got back to the States, Kerrie she worked with a lot of the operations of the airline. She would see people putting all this baby gear underneath the planes, and she said, when we have kids, I want to wear them like the women do in Jabasso. I just want to carry them with a piece of cloth. And I had said to her, well, I think people in the States and Western countries may not feel as comfortable tying just a piece of cloth. I bet we could come up with an easier way to wear a baby. And for whatever reason, she liked that idea because I was telling her ideas all the time. Like I had this idea where I wanted to make an e-commerce service that would help people give money to charity on their purchases. This business exists. Other people have done it now, but at the time people hadn't done it. And I was going to do that business. And my wife had said, can you just keep working? Cause I had gotten out of the MBA program, but when I got to this idea, she liked it. So I didn't go in.
Kerrie was the filter for ideas.
She encouraged me to pursue that one, but it wasn't to pursue it full time. In fact, Lalabu started out as a nights and weekends project.
Okay.
I started working on design ideas in the evenings and on weekends. I would use my vacation time. As I got more serious, I used my vacation time to fly to trade shows to try to see if I could find people to help make products and design them. But I always thought in my mind, I didn't have this vision for how it was going to be a business I'd do full time for over a decade. Now I started working on that in 2010. And just as an interesting note, I went to the Georgia Tech Business Plan competition in 2010 with Lalabu, and I didn't win any awards or get any recognition at all.
So you're competing against electrical engineers and their ideas, mechanical engineers, right? Yeah. And here's this guy with a shirt that has a pocket on it, right?
Well, it was a physical product. I might have been the only one there. Everybody was technology services, software as a service. And actually at that time, it wasn't the shirt. So, I mean, when you talk about pivoting, I worked on designing a product for almost 2 years that was not the product that we ever released. It was actually at a trade show. I was trying to fly standby home, and I was tired, and I got the idea for, hey, what if the shirt was the gear and the baby slid into the shirt? And I got back to Atlanta and I said, we're scrapping everything we've worked on for the last,
because you were using wraps at that time like Lalabu did in Africa, right?
I was trying to do something like what Lalabu did, but in an easier way. And instead I totally changed to a shirt you could slide a baby into, which is an interesting.
But I want to know, how come when you went to the Georgia Tech competition, okay, here you are working on this thing at night. You're a Georgia Tech grad, you're an engineer, and you're like, what am I doing? What am I working with fabric, and I'm working with baby carriers, and like, what am I doing here? Then you go and you think, oh, maybe this is something good. So you go to a competition and everybody walks right by you, right?
Yeah.
So what kept you saying, no, I really need to keep doing this?
I think it was this desire that I shared to take something that didn't exist and bring it into the world. I mean, there really are a lot of benefits to wearing your baby, having them on you, especially in the first several months after having a child. And while there were other baby carriers on the market.
When did you learn that?
I think I learned that when I was in Africa, and then I looked into it some. The way my mind kind of works, when I get into something, I kind of deep dive it and learn a lot about it rapidly. So I had learned about the benefits of baby wearing. But I realized most people in the US still didn't do it because they either thought it wasn't for them, because a lot of the products were kind of aimed at a certain demographic of people, or it was too complicated. And so I thought we can make an easier way to do this, and then everybody can do it. And that was kind of always my goal with Lalabu. Can we get more people to baby wear because we can make it easy? It wasn't to necessarily be better than the other products.
But the problem is that just like you said, I think your comment to Kerrie at the very beginning was something that is you were fighting for many years. You're saying, like, look, in America, they just don't do that. In these Western civilized countries, they just don't do that. They don't wear their babies. They have all this gear to transport their babies. Yet you said, well, I'm going to see if I can get to something where they can wear their babies. What was that countercultural marketing fight like? I mean, because you get to, as an angel investor, I'd say, who are you selling to?
Yeah. New parents.
You can't say, well, anybody who has a baby, that's who I'm selling to. That's not true, right?
Yeah. We, to begin with, because originally our first product was only for moms, I was selling to moms that had newborns. And it became also moms that, a lot of times had a more active lifestyle and were busier to begin with at the start, because the moms that would take the time to do a wrap weren't our initial customer. It was more the moms that would never use a wrap or never use a baby carrier, showing them that there's this other product that's accessible to you and it's easy and it can be a part of what you're already doing in your lifestyle, was our initial customer. Yeah.
What changed as you were going through this development and you started talking to these moms, these young moms with newborns? Okay. What were the things that you learned on how to qualify somebody? And then once somebody was qualified, how would you maybe get somebody to be qualified? In other words, what was it almost philosophical in what you were selling as opposed to a solution to carrying a baby?
I would say it's two things. One thing too, the existing baby carriers, a lot of their marketing at the time was, this is about being hands-free and going on and doing your life. Like, hey, strap your baby on you. But with Lalabu, one of the reasons I branded the product, the Soothe shirt, is what we called it, like soothing your baby, not a baby carrier, is we really wanted to promote bonding with your baby. A lot of our marketing was about spending time with your baby, doing life together, soothing them, bonding with them, connecting with them. And so our marketing wasn't about, hey, this is a product that allows you to just keep doing your life and your baby can be on you. It was, here's a way that you can have more time with your baby than you would otherwise.
You injected the philosophy or the benefits that you did. You found out in your research, the benefits of having the baby attached to you.
Yes.
And you made that the real marketing thrust.
Yep. And then when we came out with the shirt for dads, the dad shirt, we continued that because fathers, a lot of times of newborns, don't know how do I interact with this baby? There's all these products for mom and they nurse with mom, etc. But we have this shirt that made it so dad could bond with the baby right away and start doing things right away and spend more time with their baby, go on adventures with their baby. And so it was really about like having more time together as a family, which, you know, I didn't lead Lalabu with like in people's face with my personal beliefs, but my values were in there, which this value of family is important, and bonding with your children is important, and spending more time with your children is important. And so really for me, a lot of the motivation behind Lalabu was, can we do things that allow families to get closer and spend more time together? And that was a lot of the values.
How did you know at what point in the development of Lalabu early on, did you know this pitch is working? You know, I'm seeing traction now. It's early, but I'm seeing it now. So I think I'm on to something, as opposed to somebody saying to you, oh, Brian, I hear that whole thing about bonding and being close to you. I just don't buy it. Okay. Yeah. And if you hear that enough, you go like, oh God, that didn't work. Now I'm going to have to do the lifestyle pitch. Like you could do whatever you want and do it with your baby. Right. But you stayed with that pitch of this closeness, this bonding pitch. When did you know this is going to work?
I think well, I'll say this too. I was somewhat idealistic at the start, right? We haven't even talked about.
As we all are. Okay.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about one of the other aspects of the business was I wanted to be a business that had a giving model. And we gave 2% of our revenue back to help moms in Africa for years. And I was,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, take it another step. I was committed to giving 1 day a week to helping organizations that helped women in Atlanta. So my first 2 years, 1 day a week, I'd work for free for nonprofits in Atlanta trying to help them do things because I was like, I'm going to build this business. We're going to help other people in the city while we do it, and we're going to give 2% of our revenue. That was a lot to put on our shoulders during that time because we were even giving money away, 2% of our revenue before we were profitable, right?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Of revenue. That's what I was saying. That's a different story.
And you appreciate it, but you know what? The average customer doesn't. In fact, we got criticized a lot because people would say, look at this business only giving 2% of its revenue. They're making millions of dollars. I hadn't made a penny, right? I was eating through all my savings and people were criticizing me because I was only giving 2% away to help people, you know? That happened a lot, especially on social media.
So you got crucified because you weren't generous enough by their standards.
Yeah, what I learned is no matter what you do, somebody's going to criticize you. So I had to develop a certain amount of thick skin eventually to say, no matter how I help people, somebody's going to complain about it. We just got to do what we think is right and then go from there. But
did you keep doing that?
We gave money until the year that I was really heavily facing bankruptcy. And that year we stopped giving the 2% because I was just trying to keep the business going.
Trying to keep the corpus alive, right? Yeah, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, we had given almost $100,000
really
away at the point that I had almost $400,000 in debt. So I had actually lost over $500,000 because I started with $250,000 cash that Kerrie and I had saved up while we were both working. And then
that's what got it started.
It wasn't the giving that I think got us in a hole. Actually, it was the business partnership that I had. And so we'll come to that in a minute. What I was going to ask I wanted to answer your question on how did I know I got traction. I gave myself a month to experiment with different marketing ideas. So I would say, okay, because when I sold toilet,
stick to an idea for a month. That would be your marketing messaging.
Yeah. So, well, not just messaging channels. So when I sold toilets online, I did it largely through Google AdWords. Back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, Google AdWords was like where it was at. Facebook and Instagram advertising was pretty basic. They hadn't built it out as good yet. And so I'd say, okay, I'm going to focus on trying to grow Google AdWords for a month. Then I'm going to focus on what can I do on Twitter for a month? And then what can I do on Pinterest for a month? What can I do on Facebook for a month? And then I got to Instagram. And I came up with, on every platform, I just on a whiteboard came up with ideas of how I could drive sales through this platform. And one of my ideas that I had through Instagram really worked. And from a high level, it was basically, so back then you had access to the Instagram API and you could search the entire database of Instagram with no restrictions. So I built my own internal database that would search every post on Instagram where anybody ever hashtagged like 20 weeks pregnant or 30 weeks pregnant. And so I had a list of every mom on Instagram who was pregnant and the date they were due, because by knowing that hashtag, I knew about when they were due and I could see their followers and their engagement. And so I had a descending list of the expecting moms that had the most followers and most engagement in the whole world. And what I would do is, and at that time too, there wasn't private inboxes. You could direct message anybody. So I would direct message these moms and I'd basically say, hey, here we are. Can I send you our product for free? I thought you'd like it. And I had a goal to give away 4 or 5 products a day. And I would send them out. And then after they receive them, I'd follow up with them saying, hey, if you like it, could you post about us? Well, this was back in like 2000.
So you created your own influencer network.
Yeah, before influencers was a thing. Yeah, we did it with thousands of moms, and it started working. For every mom I'd give one away to, when she would eventually
think about this idea of giving it away, as opposed to, since you had this list, why didn't you say you should buy this? Why the giving it away? Why that seems odd to me.
Well, I guess my thinking is reciprocity. I had taken some negotiation classes, so maybe I did learn things in my MBA program. And so this reciprocity, I give you this thing for free. And my thought was, if they like it, they'll share it. And even if they don't post about it online, I figured these are people that know other people and they're having children. So if they use the product, people will find out, because we were trying to generate awareness. And so it just became a way of, in my mind, I thought, if I give this away, if it leads to at least 2 sales, I've at least broken even. And I thought, by the people I'm choosing to give it to, the influence they have, everyone will lead to at least 2 sales. Some of them I could see would lead to, 20 sales, 30 sales. So it started to become like, the more I can give away,
how many were you giving away? You said you wanted to give 4 or 5 away a day. How many did you? Was it tough to give your product away?
This was kind of, the process took time, right? Because you'd direct message somebody, they'd have to get back to you. Then you'd find out their address and size. And we streamlined this process over time. Yeah, but we would get to where by the time you send it to them, then when they receive it, they may not have their baby still for another 3, 4, 5 months.
I see.
So a lot of times it was, 4 to 6 months after I gave it away that they'd be posting about it.
Wow.
So, it was just a process. And that's why I'm like, if I give away 4 or 5 a day, I found in the end, I ended up having around 70% of people post. So if I'm giving away 4 or 5 a day, I'm getting like 3 people posting a day. So once we caught up to that, it's like I'm having 3 marketing posts every day. And that process allowed us to grow to like 300,000 a year in sales or so, which is still a pretty small number. But at the time,
how long did it take you to start this process? The Instagram, that like when you hit on Instagram, you got you said, this is working. So how long? You said that you started in 2010, you were working at night. You didn't quit your job until what, 12?
Quit my job January 2013. Yeah.
13. Okay.
Yeah.
When did you hit on the Instagram piece?
It was in 2014. So it was
14. Okay.
Yeah.
So while you were in it full time, that's when this started. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Our first year, we only had 20,000 in sales. And our second year, we had 90,000 in sales. And I had a friend of mine who was working with me as a CPA. He actually kind of fired himself at some point into it, because he was like, you can't afford me, and he told me like, he was one of the people early on that's like, hey, you should consider maybe ending this, because I get it. In those first 2 years, we only had a total of 120,000 in revenue. 2 years, of working full time. I used to make that much money working 1 year, and instead that's my revenue of my business, not my profit. And I wasn't paying myself. The first 2 years, I didn't pay myself $1. So, for 2 years, we were living on
that investment. That's $280,000 investment, right?
Yeah.
And then you had more money. Your savings went into it at the same time.
Yeah. Basically, we were living off of our savings, dwindling it down. During the process of growing our business, we sold our house. There's a whole story behind that. I got equity out of that allowed me to keep going. We sold 2 houses while growing our business. We made a couple $100,000 on each one we sold. All of that money went into our business. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Old Fourth Ward, for anybody that knows, in Atlanta for a time. Yeah. And part of that was my fault of just not being aware, because when I sold my house, I thought I have the cash to buy another house that's more affordable. But because I had started my own business, nobody would give me a mortgage anymore, right? Like 6 months before, I could get a mortgage for any house I wanted. Now I'm an entrepreneur. Even though I have all this cash, nobody will give me a mortgage, right? So yeah, obviously, if you're starting your business, buy your house and get your mortgage before you quit your job, because you're not going to be able to get one for a couple of years, right?
Especially in today's market.
Especially in today's market. But if you go from being like, I did well at Georgia Tech, like I graduated with highest honors, and then I actually did well in the MBA. I don't say this to be arrogant. I'm just kind of giving a picture here. I graduated with 4.0 from the MBA program, and I have this job that's paying me well. National Builder Supply became supply.com and sold for, I'll just say over 50 million. I don't know if all their stuff's public, but that's where I was one of the first people hired that went from a team of, 5 people to when I left there, almost 50. So that's where I was. So I leave all of that. And where do I find myself? Like working for free for 2 years, eating away all my savings, living in a 1-bedroom apartment, sharing a bedroom with my wife and son. I had sold my car and was bike commuting to where I was working. They sold drugs on the street below us. We had a trash chute in our wall. It was a rough area of town. I got mugged by five guys once, riding my bike back home. My parents were like, "Are you going to leave the city?" Because I was just in this rough spot. It wasn't what I would have envisioned if you had asked me when I was in the MBA program, where are you going to be in 5 years? Like, this is the situation I'm going to be in. But that was the same time I was going and pitching at like the First Mondays events and other things. And I'm growing this business. Right. And I was like on this adventure.
What about Kerrie? I mean, she's sitting there with the trash chute, you getting mugged, all this kind of going on. And she's like, look, I married a guy who graduated tech with highest honors, undergrad and graduate. He was making this much money when I married him. What did she ever go like, honey, really, come on, let's get it together here. Okay. Cause she had a vision too. She had a vision too, right? Of what your marriage was going to be like and your life was going to be like. Women do, men do. That's how we come together, right? So here you are in Fourth Ward. So what did she say during this whole time?
Well, and by the way, Kerrie graduated with highest honors from Georgia Tech too. We joke because we got the exact same GPA. And while I got my MBA, she got so many promotions at Delta. She was above MBA level by the time I came out. She was on the track to be working to a really good spot at Delta. So when she left Delta Airlines, she was making much more money than me, but we had a desire to allow her to be at home with our kids. And so she decided to stay home. And up to that point, we had always lived off of my salary because it was the lower one. So we went.
Her parents, where were they in all this? Here
Kerrie,
she is. She's this high charging executive. She's fast tracked. Okay. So what advice was she getting from her mom and dad?
She has great parents. And actually Kerrie's dad is a businessman himself, entrepreneur, and he would actually help me and coach me on some of the decisions I made along the way. Mm-hmm. So they were helpful. I would say, I actually think Kerrie's always been my biggest supporter. And actually, she didn't know she married an entrepreneur. I kind of figured out I was an entrepreneur after we got married, because I think throughout my whole life, I would have ideas, but some of the voices I would get around those ideas would be, well, here's why that won't work. And then I have Kerrie coming and saying, like, you can do that. I know you can accomplish that. Here, I'm going to support you in that. And so it's like all of a sudden I had
What a great wife. What a great wife. Yeah.
That allowed me to do so much. I will say, though, at some of the hardest parts, I mean, Kerrie never left me, never abandoned me, always supported me. But there were times where Kerrie said, I don't believe this is going to work anymore either. And those were some of the darkest times for me, because there were times where I found myself,
like everybody, your man left you. That's what that would be. Yeah. Everybody's
telling me this isn't going to work. And I'm like, well, I'm going to keep going, and we're going, it can work.
Why? Well, especially if Kerrie, who said that you should do that, and then you go through these tough times, she goes through them with you. But at one point she wakes up in the morning and says, Brian, I think it's time. We need to move on.
Well,
what kept you in the game? Because you lost that support. I know when Kathy does that with me.
Yeah.
If she gets negative on something, God, that is like that's like knocking my legs out from under me. That we can do it together, but it's hard when you're all alone. So how did you keep going?
All I had in those moments was the Lord. There were times where I felt like nobody believes in me. Nobody thinks it's going to work. And all I have is God here for me. And that didn't mean that it was going to work out. Like,
what does that mean? I have God here for me. How did that? Tell me about those moments.
Yeah, there were several times along the way. Like, I feel like my journey was one of like perseverance in the Lord and Him using that to like make Himself known to me. I'll give you one example. Trying to think which one I want to give because I have a couple, but. One example.
They're great. Well, these are really beneficial.
Okay, well, one thing is I'm working this is before I quit my job. I'm working at supply.com, really busy, doing a lot of things. I had signed up for an event called Catalyst Conference. It's a Christian conference. And I had almost forgot that I was even going to go to this thing because I was so busy, and it just came up on my calendar like, hey, Catalyst Conference is tomorrow. And I almost didn't go. And my son was due to be born in like a week or two. So I go to this conference. I'm there. I don't even know who the speakers are. It's at the lunch break, and I see one of the guys that was speaking is a guy named Jeff Schinnebarger. He's pretty involved in the Atlanta area. Yeah. I didn't know Jeff at the time. And this doesn't happen to me all the time. But I had this kind of like direction from God saying, after Jeff talks, go up and introduce yourself to him. He's going to play a big role in Lalabu going forward, or not in your business, in your life. And I was like, well, that's weird because that doesn't happen very much. But I was like, I'm going to do this. So after Jeff spoke, I just walked right up to him and started talking to him. And he said, why don't you come by my office next week? And I found myself a week later in his office talking about what it would take to launch my own business, and him saying, I want to help you. He was just going off full time to start an organization called Plywood People. And I ended up being one of the first ones to go through a lot of the things at Plywood People, which is what got me into First Mondays. And Jeff, I shared co-working space out of Plywood's co-working space for years. And I sat 15 feet from Jeff, and Jeff coached me and helped me so much in those first couple of years. And that's just one example of where the Lord told me to do something. I did it, and I saw it come through. But I would say one of the big ones later on, we'll talk about maybe I should do this. Maybe I should go down the path of saying how I got into debt, because you asked me that earlier. Was it your giving program that got you?
I want to get there. I want to stop before that because there's something else that you said.
Yeah.
Jeff coached me, right, and mentored me. What coaching did you need? What did he bring to the table for you? What gaps did he fill?
Well, a lot of what he did is he gave me somebody to bounce ideas off of, and really more fundamentally to not be alone. Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs, when they start, they're working by themselves wherever it is, whether it's a coffee shop or their house. I started Lalabu on a wall desk in a spare bedroom in my house. I put a board up on the wall with a Chromebook in a nook, and I started the business. And I did that for a while until Jeff said, hey, come be a part. We're trying to try out having a co-working space, because that was kind of new back then too.
Yeah, I remember I visited that space. Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you come back or come sit with us? So I ended up having a desk out of plywood, and I sat probably 15 feet from Jeff. And so while Jeff's growing Plywood People, I'm growing Lalabu. And instead of working by myself in a bedroom, I'm working in a space where Jeff's 15 feet from me. Jim Dudley, who's another guy in Atlanta, is 15 feet from me. A couple other businesses. There was one called So Worth Loving, Erin Erickson. She sat in front of me. She's the one that introduced me to Instagram because one day we took a picture and she said, hey, Brian, what's your Insta so I can tag you? And I was like, what's Insta? I don't know. Because Instagram wasn't a thing when I was in college. Facebook was. And so she got me to make an Instagram account, which then became the main way I grew my business for 2 years. And so I think just being a part of another group of people where everybody that was a part of Plywood at that time was trying to address some kind of social cause or issue or build a business. We were all kind of the ones striving to do something that people said couldn't be done. Being in a community of other people going through that at the same time helped me to not just be this oddball who was by myself in my own thoughts, right? I had other people to encourage me. But Jeff,
how did you know? You know, it's interesting. Did you have observations? You know, this is maybe a prejudice of mine. There's a lot of people now that when I go to these sort of co-working type spaces, there's a lot of people that talk. Everybody, it's so cool now to be an entrepreneur. You know, I had somebody recently come to me and ask if I would mentor them. And he said to me, I'm going to be in Atlanta Tech Village. You know, what do you think about that? You know, I think it looks like it's going to be exciting. He said, what do you think? Do you think I'll get a lot of help there? And I said, I'm thinking like 10% of the people who say they're entrepreneurs there are really entrepreneurs. I said, if you want to be part of that elite group, you have to be the person who's actually building a business versus building PowerPoints and giving pitches. Okay. So you're saying with Jeff's Schinnebarger's place, plywood people there, were they all people that were actually building businesses, or was there some froth also in that organization?
It was unique. It's a little different angle than that. Mm-hmm. Most at that time, at least at plywood, everybody was pretty much there building nonprofits. So they had some mission they were trying to do. I was the one that kind of didn't fit as well because I was building a business, but I had my giving, where I gave a percentage to help moms in Africa, right, and I gave a day of my time each week. And so that's kind of how I fit into that group. But I was the main one that was building a for-profit business. Other people were at nonprofit organizations. But what I think made that unique from a community standpoint is everybody there really cared about what they were doing. They weren't in it necessarily for the money. They were in it for the purpose.
That's plywood people. There is a lot of very small businesses that have very strong mission statements. Okay. That's kind of what he's always been about. But you would be the oddball there. No doubt about it. I agree with you.
Well, when I particularly became odd was when I started shipping, because my area in the place was 9 foot by 6 feet. So that was my footprint. And I had my desk here and I had a desk behind me for shipping. And I would be working on the computer, and I'd have sometimes a part-time employee back to back with me packing orders while I was working on the computer. And we were surrounded by a wall of cardboard boxes with our inventory. And I remember talking to Jeff. I was like, "Sorry, I'm messing up your aesthetic of the whole co-working space. It's not cool. I'm just like a desk surrounded by cardboard boxes,
I'm sure. I know Jeff. He must have loved it. Okay.
Yeah, he was great. Yeah.
But how did you get to the point then? At some point, you needed money. What point was that you knew you needed money? You weren't going to be able to float this by yourself just through your sales and revenue from sales and from your savings. Now you needed money. Okay.
Well, obviously, when my savings that I had was getting down low, I could project and see, 2 years in, we get to the end of this year, I'm going to be almost out of money. So when you can start to see that you're
did you go through?
Well, I started with about $250,000 from money I had saved and from equity from one of our houses we had sold. So I had burned through a lot of that. I hadn't burned through all of it. I say this is a tough question for me to answer because as I reflect on this now, I brought on my first partner because I thought I needed money at that time, and that did help at the time. But I also think it was that partnership and the change that having the money allowed that got me into the spot where I was really in trouble with debt 2 years later.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Now take me down that path. Tell me how it all sort of happened. How you, when you decided to get a partner, how you got the partner, this is what I'm trying to ask. This is something that every small business or every entrepreneur at some point, they get to. A lot of entrepreneurs, they just get a PowerPoint and they just know, I need to just raise money immediately.
I think I'll say a few things about partners. I think choosing the right partner is a make or break thing for your business.
When we say partner, we're talking about investment partner, or are we talking about operating partner? In other words, in the business.
Both, I would say.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll give you just a brief example, an experience I had before Lalabu. I launched a business called My Typeface in 2008, the summer that I was getting my MBA program. Instead of working for a company, I decided I'm going to launch a business. So I made a business that would you could take a piece of paper, write out all the characters you write, take a picture with your phone, and make a font so you could type in your handwriting. Now, I wasn't a developer. So I had worked with a friend of mine I knew from undergrad to help develop this out, and we were 50-50 business partners. But what happened after we first developed it out is he didn't want to keep working on it. He was doing another thing in Ghana at the time. And so we got it to a point, and then he was like, I'm done. But we were 50-50 partners. And so anyway, it killed the business. And so that was one thing where I learned how
did it kill the business? So he doesn't want to work. He owns 50%. He's passive now and you're active. So how did it kill the business?
Well, he also had all the source code and he didn't want to just give me all the code and keep working on it with someone else. So I had a product.
Even though he owned 50% of the business.
Even though he owned 50% of the business, he wasn't a business person, right? So that could have been a great thing for him. Like, hey, I'll, give you this, you build it. And if you make money on it, then I'll make money too. But that's not what happened. What happened was the business just kind of ended. Now,
well, tell me what happened. How did it end?
The way it ended was I had been trying to grow the business with where the product was, and it needed to have improvements and get better. Go back to 2008, the iPhone had just come out, right? We made this original product where it worked on desktop. And what we wanted to do was make an app to allow people to do it on the iPhone. And he wasn't willing to work on that, nor give me the code. I'm there trying to grow the business from a marketing standpoint, but not being able to improve the product. And eventually I just stopped because I said, it's not going to become what it needs to be if we can't improve the product. I was spending a lot of time on it.
What was the conversation that you had with him at that time?
It was really hard to have conversation with him because he was living in Accra, Ghana, in Africa. And
he was. Okay.
And I'm in Atlanta. And he was working for nonprofits in Africa, and he wanted to focus his time on that. And so it just became like he didn't want to spend his time on that. And the business kind of ended. And then I went back into the MBA program.
You actually told him, then if you're not going to give me the source code, it's over. Yeah. I'm shuttering the business. That's what you told him, right?
Yeah, that's what I told him. And that's what happened. I think we ended up having around 700 customers use the product we did it for less than a year. So this wasn't something that I spent.
Did you have revenue?
Yeah, we had revenue. Customers were paying, how much was it? I think about $25 a time to do it.
Okay.
And so, but all that being said, what I learned in that was, okay, don't just go into a 50-50 partnership with somebody where you don't have clear expectations of what the future is going to be. That was an operating partner, right? So then jump forward.
What would you have done? I know I'm drilling down on this, and probably it's not as meaningful as us getting into Lalabu, but it is meaningful to a lot of people that get into this fix, and there are tons that get into this fix, okay?
Yeah.
What would you have done differently in 2008 when you organized the business? What would you have done?
Okay, two things I would have done. I wouldn't have been a 50-50 partner. I think a lot of times two people come in and they say, oh, we'll be 50-50 partners. You really got to have the conversation and some analysis of how much is each person going to put in their time, their expertise, and their money. And then you got to get to a fair ownership percentage. In that case, I probably should have just paid my friend to do the development work rather than have him be a business partner. I should have owned 100% and I should have paid him for his time. And part of the work deliverable would have been, I get all the source code. Because then when he's not working on it anymore, then I could take it to another developer and I could have kept going with it.
And how would you have come to that to say, I should have just paid him? Was there something that you heard from him that you knew he was not going to be a long-term partner with you?
Well, I just think that people that have equity should be long-term partners. And I think they need to put in their equity needs to be in proportion to the risk they're taking and what they're putting in. So if they're a business partner, if you're 50-50, you need to both be putting in the same amount of effort and risk. If it's lower, it needs to be off. And if it's just a dollar investment partner, then you got to value the dollars that they're putting in, right? And you just know up front they're not going to be doing the work, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, go ahead. We can get off of that now. I just wanted, there was a lesson learned. I didn't want to miss it. Okay.
Yeah. So Lalabu, I'm running out of cash and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. We also were being successful that year in that we had gone up to over $300,000 in revenue. Lalabu grew every year. I never had a year that we didn't grow in revenues. And so, but I'm running out of cash and I met an investment, a partner that could invest. And it seemed like we were on the same page and that we, trusted each other, like that we got along, we thought it'd be good. I just took that investment because I thought, I think I trust this guy. I think our values align. I need the money because I'm running out of money. But where I say I think it got us into debt, and this is obviously my perspective on this, my business partner at the time, because I ended up buying him out, may have a different perspective, but I choose to look at this in a positive light. We had different visions on how the business would grow. And what the problem that his investment caused is that I had always approached the business of running at break even. And I had said to myself, if I'm going to go into debt, I'm not going to have it be more than what a car payment would be. So I was like, I'm not going to go into debt for more than $30,000 or $40,000 because worst case scenario, it's like paying off a car. I'll be fine. And I had run it that way. But when I got that investment, it was $250,000. It allowed us to start operating at a loss. My partner would come to me and say things like, hey, why are you running the business like you used to at break even? I'm your capital partner. You have the money. We should grow. So what I did is I hired employees. I got an office. And over the course of about 2 years, we ate through that $250,000. And not only that, he gave me a line of credit for more. So it allowed us to.
How much was the line of credit?
The line of credit, I think it only came out to be about $30,000. But the point is, you have a $250,000 investment, a $30,000 line of credit.
Now, the $250,000, that was equity.
That was equity. Yep.
You sold equity, so you didn't have any debt on the $250,000.
I didn't.
So now he's giving you a line of credit on top of that for $30,000. That's debt. Okay.
Yeah, that's debt. But what happened is we were operating at a loss. We were losing money. And we got to a point where I needed more money. And part of what was in the operating agreement was I could not get any other sources of money, whether it's from a bank or anywhere, without his approval. And when I went to get a line of credit, he wasn't willing to give me approval. Now, I think he was trying to protect the business from going into more debt. But where I ended up feeling trapped in it was his solution to getting more debt was to sell him more equity. So I found myself in a position where the only way I could get the cash I needed for the business was to sell even more equity, which was something that I didn't want to do. And long story short, we lost trust with each other. So from that point, I started saying—
When did you get to that? When did you get to that point where you lost trust in each other?
I think when I felt like there had been somewhat of I felt like he knew we were going down this path where I was going to get stuck, where I couldn't get the cash that I needed. And When did I know?
No, you're a really smart guy. Okay.
Yeah.
You've proven that. I know the investor you're talking about, and I know his business background, and I know what the advice that he was giving you. Okay, which is grow the business, with the capital, because a fast growth business is going to have higher value.
Yeah.
But I also know that he knows that if you're running negative, that you become totally dependent upon financing. Okay, absolutely. So he knows. How did you not know that was a path you were going down?
Well, here's what happened. So at some point, my wife, Kerrie, actually stepped in to be the COO of the business. And when she did that, she kept a really close eye on the finances. But when she was pregnant with our third child, we didn't want her, because remember, she left Delta to be able to be at home with our kids. And then here she is now working on Lalabu. And then when she's having our third child, we're like, we don't want our kids to be in daycare. We want you to be able to be home. So part of what we did, and when she was working as a COO, we basically paid ourselves one salary for Kerrie and I. And that was when we had this investment partner.
What was the salary?
$80,000 a year for both of us.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, we were making over $200,000 a year in our jobs before. Yeah.
Right. I know. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I just want people to know the sacrifices that you were making here. Okay.
Yeah. No money for 2 years and then $80,000 a year. And then what happened is, because this is a big mistake. A lot
of graduates from Georgia Tech are making $80,000 a year combined. Okay.
Yeah.
Love this.
Yeah. So this is a huge mistake I made, was not paying myself. And then when I finally did pay myself, not paying my wife, both of us, only paying one of us, because then when she needed to leave the business to be at home with our children, it's not like I could take her salary and give it to somebody else, because she effectively didn't have a salary. So we brought in another COO who was great and helped us, but she was then watching the finances. This was a big lesson I learned. I watch the finances incredibly closely now, but then I didn't. It went from my wife watching it to my new COO. My new COO, I think, had some assumptions on maybe what money I could put in or not. So I didn't fully know how bad down the path we were going of not having the money that we needed, right? And, but what I did know was happening is we were running low on money. The investor wouldn't allow me to get money through some other source.
How did you find out you were running low on money?
Well, my
COO finally come to you?
Yeah, my COO talking to me, and then me trying to get financing from banks and other things, and then my partner wouldn't approve it, and I finally realized,
Did you have to co-sign on any loans?
He never co-signed on any loans.
No, but was that the requirement from the outside bankers?
They wouldn't have. It would have just been under me and my wife, but he, for our operating agreement, would need to approve it for me to be able to. I get that,
but they didn't ask him to guarantee the loan either. Oh, no. That's unbelievable.
No, they didn't. But
so he just kept denying you the ability to get the loans.
Right, and he had proposed, you can just sell me more equity, and then I kind of made the connection then, like, he had to know this was coming because he's very sharp on the finances of a business. Absolutely. And so then I realized, like, he knew we were going down this path, and I felt like he had led me down the path of that. Also, we had divergent views of how the business would grow. I wanted to grow the business through direct to consumer and coming out with innovative products. He wanted to grow the business through going to retail and going big on scale retail. So we just had different views. And so long story short, I ended up getting to a point where he said that I could buy him out. And this was a mistake of mine, but in retrospect, it worked out. But this is what set us off into a really bad position personally, financially, because his requirement was I need to pay him back his initial investment and $100,000 profit on top of that and pay back the line of credit. So you add that all up, it's, about $380,000, right? And I only had a limited time to do it. So I pulled that together. The way I pulled it together is I liquidated all of my retirement savings because we had saved over $100,000 in a 401k, and I borrowed money from family. And I was happy to have the partnership where we weren't partners anymore, because I think it's a criteria I've come to now that if I'm talking to my wife and we're in the evening talking about problems with an employee or with a partner, and it's something that's happening all the time, something needs to change. And we had been having a lot of conversations of stress that had been coming from interpersonal conflict with the partnership. As soon as I bought him out, that was gone. And so we felt this burden off our shoulders. But what happened then is it was coming up to, it was 2018, my birthday. We hadn't taken any vacations in like 5 years. We took a brief vacation to go to the beach. And we ended up having to come home early because a hurricane was coming in where they forced everybody to leave. And I look back on that now and I was like, that was a good symbolism of what was actually about to come on our whole lives, because I got home the first day back at work. My COO tells me, hey, we don't have the ability to pay the bills. In fact, we couldn't pay them while you were on your vacation. So some of our credit cards like missed their payments and our bank accounts like defaulting. So everything was locking down in our business. And so I immediately did what I could to get things back up and running. And then I realized our business lost $150,000 the year before. And we were on that year, we ended up losing $330,000. So,
whoa.
So I have a business that lost 150, lost 330. And I, at that point, had over $300,000 debt, all tied to my name. Over 100,000 of it was money I owed to family. And that's the situation I found myself in at the end of 2018. Whereas at the beginning of 2018, I didn't have any of those debts. And I
had 30,000 in debt. That's all you had.
That's all I had. So so quickly in 6 months, I went from 30,000 in debt to almost 400,000 in debt. So I didn't follow my original plan.
Well, it's worse. It's worse. I mean, you got 400,000 in debt. You got your COO looking at you and saying, look, our checks are bouncing at the bank and we can't pay off our credit card. So now we're all of a sudden paying 26% interest, on whatever we have out there. What did you do?
Yeah, so that is when I was looking into different solutions, and that's when I actually talked to some bankruptcy attorneys, and they actually told me you should declare bankruptcy. right? I actually had my...
That's what they do. If you go to a surgeon, they're going to tell you need surgery.
I had my house up for sale because there's a whole story I won't go into now, but it had taken us years to be able to build this kind of unique property in downtown Atlanta. And because of that, I knew I could make a couple $100,000 in equity on selling it. And so I thought, I'm going to sell my house. That's going to give me a couple $100,000. I can use that as cash flow to try to turn the business around. Well, the bankruptcy attorneys told me, don't do that, because they said, you're going to fail. You lost 150,000. You lost 300 plus thousand. You're going to lose more money next year. You are going to go bankrupt. And they're like, when you go bankrupt, if you own a house, there's legal protections in Georgia where they'll let you keep 40,000. So they said, declare bankruptcy. You'll lose everything, but you'll have $40,000 and you can start over. And so I took my house off the market at that point, but it wasn't okay with me to declare bankruptcy. It seemed wrong to me. Like, I thought I could turn the business around. I wanted to pay back everybody, not just my family. I wanted to pay back American Express and PayPal and anybody else I had borrowed money from. But something interesting happened. I had been working with my father-in-law to try to get a line of credit from a bank that he was going to co-sign on to help me get it. And we had worked on it for months. And we get to the end of January. It was January 25th, 2019. And it was a Friday afternoon. I was supposed to close on the loan on Monday. I called the bank. I get put on hold for like 10 minutes. And then somebody came back on the line and said, hey, Brian, we just laid off our whole small business department at this bank. We're not doing small business loans anymore. Your loan officer doesn't work here anymore. And so you're not getting your loan on Monday. And I needed that loan. I was counting on that loan.
How much was that?
It was going to be a $400,000 loan.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then I go home and I tell my wife at the same time, that same night, we got an off-market offer on our house because I had the house on the market before. And then I took it down after the bankruptcy attorneys, and it was for $60,000 above asking price of what I had asked before. And we prayed about it and thought about it that night. And I just said, we're going to sell the house. And we're going to see this through. And so
that's basically that's the all-in moment right there.
Yeah, that was all-in moment. I actually called one of my good friends from the MBA program and talked to him and prayed about it with him that night too. And he kind of confirmed that he thought I was making the right choice based on the conversation we had.
Good for him. Good for him.
And when I did that, part of that choice too was we were going to move to Oregon. That's when we left Atlanta because
what was it like? What was the discussion with Kerrie like over that decision? Because that isn't all in. It's like, look, there's the safety net. If we sell the house, the safety net's gone.
Yeah.
Gone.
Yep. She thought it was the right thing to do as well. But we both kind of had this feeling, and she did more than me. She was like, what's happening here? You know, we've tried to do the best we can. And we've this house that we built, it was an urban farm in Atlanta, and we had developed out over 3 years. We're selling it. We thought this is where we'd raise our kids and where we'd stay. And we're losing everything. And we're just leaving it with this unknown of what's going to happen. She supported me in it. But part of the decision that I made was rather than rent an apartment down the street, we were going to move to Oregon. There was a home church I wanted to be a part of out there. And I felt like I needed some space from Atlanta. I knew everybody there. I had lived in the city for almost 20 years, Georgia Tech, Plywood Place, Plywood people. Yeah. But it's almost like I needed to step out of it to be in a place where I'd have no distractions or anything other than turning the business around, spending time with my family, and being part of a church. And it became somewhat of an adventure.
Bend, Oregon.
The reason Bend, Oregon is actually through Plywood people. There was a guy I had followed who was doing a home church kind of workshop in Oregon. And I had flown out there 6 months earlier because I kind of wanted to start a home church in Atlanta. And I decided when we were having to sell our place, well, why don't we just go to Oregon and be a part of the home church that's already there while I turn the business around, and we can learn more about doing it in person, and we'll see what the Lord has for us next. And so that's how we left to go out to Oregon. In fact, January 25th.
And Kerrie was all over that.
I told you, Kerrie's been my biggest supporter all along. But get this, January 25th, we made that decision. I left the last day of February to drive to Oregon. And a month later, and she flew out 4 days later. And my drive from Georgia to Oregon, I mean, it was a rainy, bad weather day. I felt it fit what I was leaving Georgia. And I'm driving across the country, literally calling investors, calling people, asking for help. I was calling my old boss at supply.com, asking him for help. I had to negotiate with my mortgage provider on my house because I had done a HELOC on my house. And because I sold it so soon, I had a penalty because I sold my house too soon. So I owed them like an extra $40,000. And I was trying to convince them like, hey, is there any way I can get out of this? And by the way, I didn't get out of it. I had to pay them that $40,000. There's so much about it. I'm driving out to Oregon. I finally get to Oregon after driving 40 hours across the country. And I get to my driveway of my rental there, and the whole thing's iced over because they just had 4 feet of snow. I could not get my car up the driveway. And it was a shared driveway with a neighbor. The neighbor is like honking her horn at me, getting mad at me because I'm in the driveway. And I'm like, hey, I'm your new neighbor. I ended up going to a gas station at 11:30 at night and putting chains on the car. I had never done that. So I'm like laying in the snow, putting chains on a car at 11:30 at night, get the car up the driveway, go into the house, lay down in a bed where it's dark and cold and no sheets. And I went to bed on this bed with no sheets. And I just remember sitting there praying, being like, what have I gotten myself into? Lord, please let this work out. And that's where I was in, February of 2019, and we spoke later.
That's considered a pretty low, okay? Because all those calls you made didn't turn into, there was no fruit from those calls, right? You were still $400,000 in debt by the time you were laying on that mattress with no sheets.
There was no monetary help, but there was people encouraging me, trying to give words of wisdom, trying to tell me things that could help. My old boss at supply.com, he was telling me things he thought I needed to do to get the business where it needed to be. And what I did in 2019 is I completely overhauled the business. I mean, we went from production in the USA to production in India. We went from me having all the employees to I was the only full-time employee in 2019 and 2020. We went to a 3PL. I made everything variable cost instead of fixed cost. I had to get out of I had a 5-year lease in Atlanta. I ended up finding somebody I could hand it over to. That saved me $4,000 a month. But I also lost the $65,000 build out I had done a year earlier from doing that, right? So I did all these things to stop the bleeding of money. And then I had this vision because to that point, this is an important point, I had always focused on revenue growth. I changed to say, and I should have done this earlier. This is the big thing I learned from 2018 to 2019. It's not about revenue growth. It's about profit growth. And we have to have a business that is making profit month over month. So my whole goal in 2019 was to turn this into, it wasn't to pay off all the debts. It was to actually be making profit month over month. That was my And in 2019, we lost $140,000, which was better than the 300 plus we had lost the year before. But we paid $115,000 in interest. So of that, if it weren't for all the interest payments, we actually would have
only... You pay the interest too.
So I told you it was almost $400,000 in debt. Throughout that year, I got up to almost $1 million in debt. And the reason... So I'm an industrial engineer. It's about optimizing systems. I think I push things to their limits sometime. I figured out how I could use credit cards and loans based on the revenue of your business. Because if you go to a bank, they look at everything and they won't give you a loan in that situation. But in e-commerce, they look at the revenue you have coming in. So there's people that would give me loans based on my revenue, and my revenue was still growing. And they didn't care to look at any of my debts. All they looked at was my business revenue. The problem is most of those loans came due in 5 to 6 months. And most of those loans had, if you looked at it, APR was, 16 to 20% APR. Right. So at one point, I got up to the point between credit cards and loans. I had 40 different people I owed money to. I would owe $20,000 to $50,000 a week in a business that's doing roughly $1 million a year in revenue, right? And I mean, that was the time where everybody was telling me this isn't going to work. That's when I reached out to you and said, I have a plan on how I can turn this around. Here's what's going to happen in the next year. What do you think? The church I was with out there was super helpful because it was an outlet I had. I basically worked, spent time with family, and was part of this church. And I knew that the church, they were praying for me, and they said, if you fail, we will help you get back on your feet. But they also said to me, why don't you just throw in the towel? You're a smart guy. Just same as the bankruptcy, just start over. And I was like, no, I have a vision for how this could work, and it's going to give opportunities for me and my family in the future. And I think it's just right to pay people back. I'm not going to
$1 million in debt.
Yeah, $1 million in debt.
Advice to kind of hang it up. You're a smart guy. You can get back on your feet. We'll help you. What was the vision that you had that kept you going at that point? Because that's boy, I mean, you're in a concentration camp at this point. You know, I mean, it is, you said $20,000 a week, okay, is basically $1 million. Is that $1 million a year?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm doing $1 million a year. I'm paying back $20,000 a week.
Yeah.
Keep myself up. So it's coming in and going straight out. Okay. So what was your vision that made you sort of turn to these people and say, nope, that's not the right thing to do?
Well, I had laid out a plan through changing my production partner and focusing on having a profitable business where a year from then I could have a profitable business. I said in 2020,
that's what got you back, because you saw you could get to profitability.
Yeah. I said in 2020, we're going to make $450,000 profit. We actually ended up making over $700,000 profit in 2020, but I didn't know. See, it's one thing to be at the end now and see what happened. At the time, I didn't know for sure what was going to happen. But I saw where we could get there. And I got to the point where I just was starting my day praying, asking for help. I was like, I'm going to work as hard as I can. I'm going to pray to the Lord to help me. And I'm going to trust him. And I think part of it's this. I'll give you an analogy. I really felt like this is what my family was supposed to be doing and where the Lord had me. I took my son yesterday to a gymnastics thing, my 2-year-old, and he's on a balance beam, and he can do the balance beam, but he won't do it unless I hold his hand. Mm-hmm. And I look at him like, hey, Boaz, you can do it, but he won't do it. He's like, hold my hand. I can just barely touch his hand, and then he does it all. And it's like, knowing that he has his father holding his hand, he's willing to do it. And I think that's how it was for me. It's like, I knew the Father had me doing this, and I didn't know I'd succeed. But I was like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I really had a conviction that I wasn't supposed to throw in the towel. And so I was able to keep going.
Can you explain how you knew the Father was holding your hand?
There is a lot of things, but I'll give you one story. So at the end of, or at the beginning of 2020, this was before Boaz, who I just mentioned, was born. He was due.
By the way, I love that name. I think that's great. You know, I've never heard anybody name that after that.
Well, let me tell you.
The Uncle Ruth there and all that. That's really, really cool.
So let me tell you about his name. So remember, the day that my loan fell through and Kerrie and I are questioning, like, why has this all happened to us, was January 25th of 2019. Boaz was born on January 5th of 2020. And a couple weeks before that, I was flying out to Minnesota to pitch, who became my business partner that ultimately bought out our business at the end of last year. I had reached out to her to pitch her on investing in our business because I saw her building out some other baby businesses. And I had said, hey, are you going to get into baby wearing? Because instead of building out your own, you should invest in Lalabu. And we had started talking about it, and I was flying out to St. Paul to meet with her to see if she would invest in our business at the beginning of January. And I'm sitting at the airport in Redmond, Oregon, and my flight keeps getting delayed. And it got delayed to the point that I had to make a connection that I was like, I'm going to miss my connection. And I was getting really just kind of nervous because I was like, if I miss my connection and I cancel a meeting with her, I'm probably not going to get this investment. And I'm sitting there, and I listened through the Bible, and I was doing a Bible plan for the year, and I just was listening to where I was in the Bible while I'm sitting on the plane. And it was in Isiah, I think it is somewhere around chapter 40. It's where it's reading like that. Actually, let me just find it real quick. Sorry.
40 would be, I believe, where clear the path for the Lord.
Yeah, so I am in 40. I'm in Isaiah 40, and it's where it's talking about the Lord's the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. So I'm listening to this, sitting on the plane, and it says, he does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and grow weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. And right when it says they shall mount up with wings like eagles, the plane just took off. Like the pilot took off down the runway, and it took off. And it was a moment of many others I've had in the past where I felt like the Lord was saying, I see you and I'm with you. And I just had a peace about it. I was like, I'm either going to make this connection or I'm not. I'm either going to get this investment partner or I'm not. But God sees me. He's with me. I ended up making the connection, meeting with her. She ended up investing in the business. My son ends up getting born like a week or two later. I made his middle name Jireh. Jehovah Jireh is the God who sees me. And that was a reminder to me that when he was being born, here's this God who sees me through this whole process. And it was actually the God who sees me earlier on in 2004 that led me to accept Christ to begin with, because he did things that made me know like he sees me. And so I get back, and what happens shortly after that? We have
Where did Boaz come from? Finish the story.
Yeah, well, so Boaz.
The name, yeah.
Yeah, so Boaz. I had always liked the name Boaz, and when we had our second son, we ended up naming him Nahum. Nahum Joshua. It means the turning of the Lord is salvation, and it's because he was wrong way in the womb until like the day before he was born, and I was like, if he turns, I'm going to name him Nahum, which means to turn. And he turned, and he was delivered the right way at the last minute. And so we named him Nahum. So I didn't get to use Boaz there. But the reason I gave Boaz on my third son the name Jireh was because God had like manifested, like, I see you. And shortly after that, we had the 15 days to slow the spread, and COVID happened, right? But it was in all of the ways that I had been borrowing money, the credit cards, the lending off of e-commerce revenue, all stopped. It all stopped for the first couple months after COVID. But because I had the investment from my new business partner, that spanned the gap of the cash.
How did you deal with that, the new business partner? Here you are in this massive debt situation. You know, you're starting to move towards profitability. Your vision has changed from just grow revenue. How did that deal come together? I mean, how did you position it? Did you position it as debt? Did you position it as equity? How did that work?
I positioned it as equity. I had actually started talking with Mia a couple of years even before I pitched her on investing in Lalabu, because I saw what she was doing.
Mia is the lady that's in St. Paul?
Yeah, Mia.
Okay.
Yep. So she had been doing amazing things on Instagram. I noticed it, and I just DM'd her saying, I see what you're doing on Instagram. Can you help me learn how to be more effective on Instagram? And we had started kind of a relationship of her helping me grow my business through Instagram. Yeah. So then when I pitched her on investing in Lalabu, I had already been talking to her for almost 2 years otherwise. And I pitched her on, I'm giving you a really good deal. And most investors, because every investor at that point had said no to me because they said, you have a failing business, right? I said, I'm giving you a really good deal because here's how I've worked to turn the business around all through 2019. This was the January of 2020. I said, we're going to make money this year. And at the end of the year, the business is going to be worth, Y. I'm going to let you invest at X. And I gave her like a really affordable buy-in on equity for where the business could be at the end of the year. And she had a very successful business in her other business. I think she had cash. And so from her standpoint, hey, here's a way for me to invest some cash that I have. And if he's
in a business in a market that I completely understand.
Right.
And with a guy that I've been mentoring who has taken my advice and and implemented it, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pluses there. Yeah, a lot of positive.
And so she invested the money, and largely throughout 2020, I just ran the business. We would talk maybe an hour.
How much money was it?
$250,000.
Okay.
Yeah, $250,000. That helped me span the time when I couldn't borrow money. As I said, we ended up making money in 2020. Now, I didn't know we were going to make money in 2020 because we almost didn't. And we almost didn't make it cash flow wise that year. I don't know if you want to hear this story, but basically, in an odd way, I started to feel comforted by what was happening with COVID, because prior to COVID, I had a struggling business and everybody else was doing just fine. We get into COVID and all of a sudden everybody's struggling, and the banks and the government are doing these programs to help small businesses. And I could actually qualify for them. Like, I qualified for the Paycheck Protection Program. I could apply for an EIDL loan, an SBA loan. The SBA would never give me a loan before COVID, right? So I applied for one of the EIDL SBA loans, got approved for it. And then when they went to issue it, they blocked it because I applied for it under Kerrie, because Kerrie was actually technically the owner in the business. I didn't own shares. And her credit score is too low because I had opened a credit card for her a couple months earlier that lowered her credit score. So I'm in this spot. Here's where I am. I have $35,000 cash. That's all I had left. I'm trying to get a $150,000 loan. I could appeal the process, but I have to do it in the next 2 weeks or I won't get it. So I actually took $33,000 of the 35, paid down $33,000 of a credit card in her name, reached out to a friend I knew in Georgia who was a mortgage broker, and said, hey, I want you to act like I'm buying a home, do a rapid reset on my credit, which takes 2 pulls on your credit. But I was like, I want you to do it on my wife, and I'm hoping that me paying down this $33,000 will increase her credit. And it did. It increased her credit score to the next level. I appealed the decision, and I ended up getting a $150,000 loan 2 days before I wouldn't have had the money to keep the business going. And then we ended up ending that year making all the money that we did. And from that point forward, we were making money month over month. We were there. I mean, we were making on average.
What was the big thing that you, go ahead, finish that, you're making on average?
We were making on average $50,000 to $100,000 a month. And ever since then we did. I mean, we made over $1 million in 2021,
What is it that, and what kind of revenue did you have?
4.7 million. And we made over $1 million profit off of that.
So you're doing better than 20%. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So what happened with, what did you do differently to go from, besides just, intellectually making that decision that says, I'm not just going to be growing revenue. It's really about growing profit, becoming profitable, and then growing profits, right?
Yeah.
How did that change how you operated the business?
Yeah. So one of the big things is when I first started thinking about doing Lalabu, remember I went to Africa in 2009. That was around the financial crisis, the housing crisis back then. And a lot of people had lost their jobs in the U.S. And I had this idea in my mind, if I do a business, I'm going to do all the manufacturing and production in the USA. And we had to that point. We did our production in California. We ordered fabric out of North Carolina, but our margins weren't as good from it. Right. And so I had to let some of those idealistic things I had before go, including the giving 2% of revenue. So in 2019, I worked all year to move our production to a manufacturer in India. And that actually cut our cost of goods sold by over 50%. So getting that in place, and also I reduced our overhead from employees. The cool thing was I didn't actually have to fire anybody. Everything kind of came through where different employees were moving or wanting to do other things. And one or two employees I moved to part-time instead of full-time. But I just drastically cut all of our fixed operating expenses, got rid of the lease, got rid of the extra employees that we couldn't afford yet full-time, changed our cost of goods sold, and I developed a secondary product. I have a picture of it here. I showed you the dad shirt. I developed this product, the carrier. So the baby carrier market is a much bigger market than the shirt market. And by the way, that's my son, Boaz. He's the only one of my kids that was a model for us. But that product came out at the end of 2020, and it gave us a product that people could buy after they had the shirts. And now it's our number one revenue driver. And then the dad shirt also, by marketing it more, became our number two revenue driver. And the Sue shirt, which had always been our primary. So just in the year following release that, we more than doubled our revenue, and we actually decreased our marketing spend because my marketing spend became more efficient through what I was doing, and I was able, my average revenue per customer more than doubled. And so
it's interesting the way you're talking about this transition that you make. What you did as the CEO founder is you actually got deep into the finances of the business. You said, this is how much we're bringing in. This is what it's costing us to generate that revenue. This is the G&A. And you went line by line to figure out what can I eliminate so that the bottom line goes from red to black.
Yes. Okay. I built out a model in a single spreadsheet.
A cultural change that takes place in a business, and it has to be led by you. So that's pretty incredible that you did that.
Yeah, I built it. I had to do it. I built out a model in a spreadsheet that modeled the entire business, starting from marketing expense and cost of goods sold. And I ran the business from it. And I remember I told you that prior to 2018, I wasn't looking at the finances. Well, 2019 on, first thing I did every week, Monday, was spend the first half of the day looking at all the finances and where we were. And until I handed the business over, every week, Monday morning, first half of the day, checking on all the finances, checking on all the operations stuff. And I took it all on myself. I wasn't going to not be aware of that anymore. That was probably the biggest mistake I made.
You were on it.
Every week.
How did you get to this point where, okay, so if I'm doing 4.7 million, I'm making $1 million in profitability. I would think that you would get to the point and say, I'm never going to sell this thing. I'm making $1 million a year. I don't know what equity stake that 250,000 bought. Okay. But irrespective of that, I'm still making a lot of money. Kerrie and I are like in the money.
Yeah.
Good stuff. You figured it out. You know how to sell a bit. You know how to run a business profitably now and grow revenue. How did this whole sale come about? Tell me about that.
Well, as you can imagine, in 2018 and early 2019, I actually pitched all kinds of people on buying our business. At the time, I was praying, Lord, can you just help me get out of this situation? Because I had realized turning this around is going to take years if I can ever even do it. And the answer was always, no, you're going to keep going, right? Interestingly enough, when this sale came, I didn't pitch them on it. They pitched me. I had gone to them saying, hey, here's what I'm thinking for 2022. Here's how I'm going to finance it. Here's what we're going to do. And they said, well, we'd be interested in buying more equity. And I said, well, let's entertain that. And then they said, we'd actually be interested in buying the whole business from you if you're open to that. And the reason I is because at various times from 2018 onward, I would take my phone sometimes when I'd have insights and I'd record a video to myself. And I had videos that I had recorded to myself saying, if you ever get the chance to sell your business, do it. And here's the reasons why. And I was reminding myself that, when your business is doing well is when you least think I want to sell it because everything's working. But I reminded myself, business is ups and downs. Almost every time something really good happens, eventually something really challenging is going to happen. It's just not this thing that it always works out. And so I just reminded myself through these videos of all the sacrifices I had made over that 10 years and the blessing it would be for my family to really have more of my time back. Because while I started Lalabu to want to have more time with my son when he was 6 months old, he's 10 now. And when you look at the last handful of years, while I did block off the weekends and I was there at night, I was working a lot harder than I would have been if I had had a job somewhere else. And we had done hardly any vacations or anything. And I just said, what I always worked towards was to have the freedom to have more time with my family and invest in my kid's life. And with this sale, I get that. And so it was those.
Was it a cash sale?
It was cash sale. I have all the cash.
Cash sale with with a second bite of the apple in there. So you have some retained equity.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yet so now what does your life look like going forward? You said you're 40?
I'm 40. I just turned 40 a month ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is your life? You got 40, you got 4 children, and you got one on the way. Okay. Coming in March. Okay. So what does your life look like going forward for you and Kerrie?
Well, what I'm hoping to do, you can see now, maybe I'm wearing this Team Fosse shirt.
Yeah, I see that.
It says Team Fosse Trade School down there. Made this for my kids. It's for our homeschool. Going to Georgia Tech, used to be the North Avenue Trade School. I wanted to brand our homeschool for our kids. And the first thing I did with them was we made these shirts ourselves. Like we screen printed them ourselves. I've always had a vision to teach my children the real life skills that they're going to need going forward. And I have had a desire to help each one of them launch a business by the time they're college age. And so part of what I'm wanting to do now is take them through a trade school, find a skill, teach them how to do it, and have that be part of their homeschool experience. But other than that, I'm really trying to figure it out from this point because, a decade of living under the pressures I was under, and I would say Georgia Tech undergrad was pressure, and a lot of my childhood, the sports and things I did was pressure. I realized I really have had about 20 years of really pushing myself and having a lot of stress. And it's hard to take that off. I've had some days where I'll say right now, Brian, you don't have anything you have to do today, but I still have this feeling of I have responsibility and things I have to take care of. And so I've been done with it for 4 months. I don't know how many months it's going to take for me to fully relax.
I'll share something with you because I'm going through a transition now, which is, I think it's one of the most difficult that I've been through. Okay. Which is here I am getting towards 70, in March I'll be 70. And it's, I'm not doing what I used to do with the intensity that I did it. In fact, I've kind of wound it all down. I'm moving myself out of leadership positions in Atlanta. By the end of this year, I'll be without any leadership responsibilities. Okay. And usually in the past, when I was sort of in what I'll call your period in life, which I call the pressure zone. Okay. Is you're always saying, well, if I'm stopped doing this, then I need to start doing this, right? I mean, there's this next thing. And I got to the point where I told somebody, I said, I'm going through this transition. And this is actually a counselor that I'm talking to who's helping me through a little of this. He said something that had a big impact on me. He said, as you're going to, I said, what I don't want to do is I want to leave room for, what I do want to do is leave room for God. So if I end what I'm doing now and I just kind of free myself up, I think God's going to have something on the other side, but he can't use me while I'm still tied up. Okay.
Yeah.
He wants me to free up to whatever this next thing in life. He goes, he says, you just need to realize that God still sees purpose for you. He still sees you as somebody who could make a difference for him here on this earth, okay, with the people you might serve. He says, I just love that you're being patient and you'll see what he opens up for you. And that's what I think is going to happen to you. I mean, you're an extraordinary gifted couple. And I love your priority of your children, but I think that there's something else that's going to be on the other side. But it does take great patience to step off of the fast-moving train and watch those trains go by you. Okay, Brian, I don't have one. You know what? Right?
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. And you've trusted God through this entire process. You're amazing. You're amazing. This is great. I'm glad it had such a happy ending for you.
Me too, because it didn't have to, right? I recognize that it didn't have to. God could have taught me all these lessons and been and it didn't work out,
But so what would have happened based on the story I'm hearing from you? I don't think there would have been a sadness to it because in other words, you could look back and say, I lost the game, but I absolutely left it all on the field.
Yeah.
You didn't step out early and you didn't take the advice of you should just stop. You're a talented guy. You can get a job. You could, whatever it is. you just kept going. And so if it fails and you've given it everything you have, then that is God's will. You failed. It's over. Okay. So, no regrets, man. You lived no regrets. It's great that it turned out positive, but I think you would have ended up with a no regret situation. You still have Kerrie. You're still in love. You still have beautiful kids. You still have a plan for your family and how you want to be involved. And that had nothing to do with the business.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. And I told Kerrie in the middle of 2019, we're getting to do what we want to do. We're part of a great church. We're homeschooling our kids. The challenge was I just have this massive debt hanging over me, and we don't know what's going to happen with it. A real quick kind of side note. We've all had experiences of failing or not pushing hard enough to the end. I remember my freshman year of running cross country in high school. In the freshman race, I was in first place in like the county championship freshman race. And I had two people pass me in the last 100 feet, and I got third place. And it kind of always bothered me. I was like, Brian, you had a chance to win first place, and you just, ran out of steam in the last 100 feet, and you'll never get that chance back. And this one may sound silly too, but when the Falcons were up 28-3 at halftime in the Super Bowl a handful of years ago and they lost, I'm from Atlanta, and then I left and went to Oregon right after that. I was like, if I get the chance to see this through and win, it's like you got to take the chances that you have, because you may not ever get that chance back again, And so, I don't know, that motivated me a lot of times. And that was part of, you get the offer to sell your business, take it, And so I did.
I did. I had one guy, I did have one guy. I remember talking to a banker when I was starting to get into angel investing back in 1992. Yep. And he said to me, the landscape in Atlanta, Atlanta back then was a very small technology town. He said, but the landscape out there, he says, is littered with companies that had valuations that were high. Buyers came and wanted to buy, and they didn't sell, and now their valuations are down. Mm-hmm. And he said, I never forgot him telling me that, and I came to, if somebody comes to you and they want to buy your business, that's like a miracle. Yeah. You created something from nothing, and now they want to give you this. And you're saying, well, that's just not enough. And it's like, no, don't treat them like gold. That's just incredible. And you did that. So I agree with what you did. I think that that's fantastic. But most people are afraid to do it because they sit there and it's greed, or it's this insecurity of, well, what would I do anyway?
Yeah.
But you trust God and you just move forward.
And my hope,
man, that story, I love that story of that race, because that's your life and what you did with Lalabu. Is you did run that extra 100 feet and you didn't let somebody pass you. Yeah. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and there's other examples of that. I remember I mentioned earlier, our cross-country team was the first one to win a state championship at my high school. It's Collins Hill High School in Georgia. They've won a lot of state championships now, but at the time we had never won one. And we worked my whole 4 years from when I was a freshman to senior to try to do that. And I remember we lost the county championships to Brookwood at the time, who had won many state championships. And then we won the state championship by 1 point, which the way cross country works is it's the adding up the places of the top runners. So just one person going in front of the other in the whole race determined the whole race. And that was just another example in my life of you have setbacks, you keep working on it. Every single piece of progress matters. It all goes into the final result,
It's sort of like that book that's been such a hit is Atomic Habits, right? Mm-hmm. It's those little itty bitty things you do every day that has this huge impact on the other end. And what we really want to do is we want huge impact every day. And it just doesn't work that way.
And I laughed at your intro where you said Brian's like a 10-year overnight success, particularly because when I started Lalabu, I told you I started a nights and weekends project. In my mind, it was a 4-month project. I was going to do a month of designing a product, a month of crowdfunding, a month of manufacturing, a month of shipping. And then I don't know what I was going to do. And I remember Jeff Schinnebarger pulling me aside and being like, Brian, to make this a business, you're going to need to give it at least 3 years. And I remember at the time thinking, 3 years? That's so long. And then here I am, a decade later.
That's the way it works. That's how long it takes to build value. But what happens is media destroys the entrepreneurs because they publish the one that did do it in 18 months or 36 months. By and large, you look at these, you talk to VCs, they'll say the funds are 8 to 12-year funds. Okay.
Yeah.
To get exit. So some of them are now 15. I have one investment now that's 16 years. Okay. Things take time to build value. They just do. Brian, this has been a stupendous gift that you've given me and to my audience. I really appreciate you sharing all this. And I hope that it is something that someday your kids, as they get old enough, they'll view this thing like when they're 15, 16, and they start seeing how things work. And they'll look at this and they'll go, wow, I didn't know all that went on. Because we have a way of telling our kids sort of vignettes, but they can't string them all together. This is strung all together. So you and Kerrie should be very, very proud of what you've accomplished. I know your kids are going to be great leaders. I just know it.
I can't wait to share this with them. One side note, kind of to wrap this up, my son, who's 10 now, 3 years ago, 2019, we're in the middle of trying to turn all this around. I'm on a bike ride with him in Oregon. And he says, Dad, when I'm your age, I want to have a business, only I'm not going to have debt in my business. And I was like,
you don't even understands what debt is. Yeah. Oh my God.
And I was like, what, son, I would like to have a business without debt too. And I hope that comes true.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me close this out for everybody. And Brian, thank you again for all of this time and for being so transparent and sharing your story here. And congratulations on the great success. And we'll be praying for you as you go forward.
Thank you.
But for everyone else, thanks for joining us. Please sign up at paparelli.com and we'll see you soon. Thank you.